Okay, so I'm joined again with George Tsougrianis. I think we've had quite a few calls like this now, haven't we, George? It's becoming a regular thing.
Absolutely, yeah. It's fun.
No, I love it, man. And today we're going to talk about basically video editing and George's skills as a professional filmmaker. He's going to teach me some stuff. If you're starting to do videos yourself, hopefully this will be useful for you as well. But the topics that we're going to talk about are video editing software. So probably just touch on that lightly. So whether you go full on with something like Final Cut Pro or get started with something like iMovie or Hit Film Express, which is what I'm using at the moment. I'm sure George is going to have some advice on that. And then we're going to dive into maybe some techniques about how to actually build a decent video, whether it's an ad or content, but it really to capture someone's attention and make it resonate and have that feeling about it. So George, on that note, if we go, first of all, let's get the video editing software part out of the way, and then let's pick your brains for some real expertise on the good stuff.
Cool. Yeah, I guess you mentioned it off the top there. There's lots of different options in terms of what you want to use for software, and it really depends on the comfort level. The particular software that we use here in our operation is Adobe Premiere Pro, and I guess one of the things I really like about Adobe Premiere Pro is it integrates really well into a lot of the other software options that Adobe provides. So for example, Photoshop, right? There's a certain familiarity when you use Adobe products that carries over from one piece of software to another, and the way they integrate it in very, very well. So especially, for example, for us, where we actually have the Creative Cloud option, you've got all the tools nicely integrated, and it just gives you a really seamless way of kind of working from one part to the one program to the other program. The other thing I would say about Adobe Premiere Pro, in our particular situation where we use a lot of different types of files, Adobe does a really good job of handling them natively. In other words, being able to take an MP4 file and incorporate it into a project that also has an AVI file or an MPEG-2 file. A lot of other software options, you have to render it out or you have to convert it. Whereas Adobe, like I know we've done projects where we've got like 3 or 4 different file types all on the same timeline, and Adobe handles it very, very well.
So that's really handy, because I had this exact problem yesterday. I was editing a video, and I don't know why, but I've never been using AVI files before, and for the first time yesterday, I had some AVI files that I needed to drop in there, and HitFilm wouldn't read them. I was like, God damn it! So I had to figure out how to convert them, and it took ages, and it was just hassle, and so it's really handy.
Yeah, that's definitely one of the big things, and I guess that's I guess depending on your level of skill, I guess from our standpoint, that's really the game that you want to look at. I guess really for us, it's always about time, right? How much time does it take you to create these things? And, particularly when you're doing it in a situation like us where, time is really money, you want to look for software and for work that really allow you to maximize your time, so that things like rendering is another big one, right? Where, if you work on a project and then you got to take, 12 hours to render out, and then you realize, oh my God, I got to make another change. And then, like you can see where that compounds the workflow and the process. So, I guess it really comes down to, like the old cliche, is really having the right tool for the right job, and sort of understanding a little bit about what kinds of videos that you are wanting to create. Especially when you start using any effects or things like that, then, again, your computer power really, comes into play. Things like RAM. RAM is one thing that you can, that's one of the cheapest things that you can do to your computer that will really help the overall performance in terms of video. Because again, video can be so intensive in terms of memory that having 32 gigs or you know, whatever, I guess, whether you're talking laptop or desktop, you know, having as much RAM as you possibly have really does help to make a difference when you are trying to edit some of these projects. So yeah, you know, iMovie, you know, it's amazing what you can accomplish with this little sucker here. Like, I know I've, you know, just the regular iPhone having, you know, iMovie and you know, being able to just do basic editing. It's amazing what you can do with this, or on an iPad for that matter. Yeah. So again, you know, I guess the short answer is it really comes down to what you want to achieve as far as your products. But certainly, if you are someone, you know, that you know, you're in digital marketing and you know you're going to do a lot of videos, you know, it probably isn't a bad idea to make an investment at some point into. And there are other options. So Adobe isn't the only one. Sony has an option. There's probably about 4 different ones, and just trying to remember what the one that Sony has. But yeah, Adobe has done a really good job of kind of cornering sort of that mid-level market. And a lot of people have used Photoshop over the years, and so I think they've really leveraged that really well to kind of get more and more people into the digital editing space.
Sure. Is it Vegas? I've just Googled.
Yeah, Sony Vegas. Thank you. Yeah, that's a pretty good piece of software too, and it's a little bit more cost effective than Premiere Pro, and it has a lot of the same features. And then there are other options or plugins that you can incorporate into that one that I have researched, and you know, it is definitely another good option as far as sort of mid-level editing software.
Okay. No, that's really handy, George. Thank you. And with so with software, whether like you say it's Adobe Premiere or Final Cut Pro or, you know, Sony Vegas or Hit Film, which is the, you know, the base one that I'm using at the moment. As far as I understand it, they all generally run off the same principle in that you build a timeline, and in that timeline you're layering video and audio sort of across each other. So let's talk about when you're going into a project, and let's talk about this in terms of, let's say a 5-minute video advert, because I think a lot of people watching this are probably in SFM. And also, if you're in SFM and you want to do video, generally speaking, it's probably going to be because you want to market, right? You want to market and create an ad. So if you were creating an ad, what would be your creative thought process as you're going into that, in terms of, like, you know, the footage that you want to get and how you're going to sort of build it together? You know, how would that work in your mind?
Well, the first step is, you know, again, trying to figure out what the focus is, you know, so making the big assumption there that, you know, okay, my video is going to be about a particular subject, because for me, that's the most critical piece, is really identifying, okay, what is the focus of this particular video that I'm going to create? Because that's a critical, you know, very critical piece. The next thing is, once you've identified that, is to do, and you don't have to get crazy here, you don't have to be an artist, but just come up with a basic storyboard, you know, that kind of lays out the different scenes that you're going to shoot. Because what that really does is, number one, it gives you an opportunity to kind of flush out the idea as you kind of do your little storyboard, but it also gives you a bit of a reference in terms of, okay, scene 1 is going to be this, scene 2 is going to be this, scene 3 is going to be this. And it really allows you to kind of see the flow. For me, one of the most important things, especially when you get into the editing process, is the flow or the pacing. To me, that's one of the most critical things of a video, and can really determine whether your video works or not. Is how is it pacing? Is it fast? Is it slow? Because all of that ties back into the emotional elements that you want to create within your particular video. So, you know, again, your storyboard is a critical ingredient because it kind of helps identify a little bit of that pacing. And then with that, it allows you to kind of determine, okay, what other additional shots that we need. So, you know, going back to your particular video, for an example, when you showed us that a few weeks back, you know, you had a really nice sequence there where, okay, you're on the beach, you're talking, and then you cut away to some other support visuals that, you know, as you were talking about your life, we could actually see you know, what you were kind of talking about there. And at the time, my suggestion was, I love that, but I wanted to see more of that so that it actually tied a bit more of a sequence, because what you had done is you had kind of popped in a shot here, a shot there, another shot there. And it kind of created that jarring, okay, you've left and now we're into another world, and then we're popping back into the beach. And then, you know, it was a back and forth thing. Whereas what I really thought needed to happen there is just to build a nice little sequence, because you had all the great visuals, but just to tie it together. So as a viewer, as I'm watching that, you know, once I've left the beach and watching these other visuals that you're talking about, it really solidifies, you know, those points that you were talking about. So again, that's important from the standpoint of a storyboard, because once you know what you're going to be talking about, you can identify things like that says, okay, I know I'm going to need some additional visuals here because I'm going to be talking about specific things that relate to what it is that I'm going to be talking about.
Yeah, no, that's really handy. And I think you've made me realize maybe some of the things that I didn't do as well there as I could have done. So the storyboard is one of them. Because the way that I've always shot an ad up till now is I get a feel for the focus. I get a feel for what I want to talk about. I'd write often a basic script, and then I'd memorize the key points of the script, but I wouldn't memorize the whole 5 minutes start to finish. But then I'd shoot the ad, I'd talk, do my thing, make the point, whatever. And then as soon as I drop that footage into the timeline, I'd then go through and go, right, at this point, what footage do I have and what could I fit in here that kind of works? And it's like a disjointed backwards process.
Yeah, I see. So right away, you're basically doing the process, but, you know, again, just doing it from the beginning of actually identifying that, because that, you know, essentially you are doing the process, but, you know, taking that time initially beforehand. And again, I appreciate the fact that a lot of us are doing, you know, these spontaneous videos, and that's fine. As long as you have sort of a basic, you know, that storyboard or even a basic outline, right, of really kind of identifying some of those visuals. Because when you know, like, again, you had some really great visuals, you know, you had stuff from Momentum Day, you had, you know, great visuals of you, you know, skydiving, right? So those, to me, those are high value visuals that you want to really incorporate very, very well, right? When you don't have those visuals, it becomes a lot more difficult. But by gosh, when you have strong visuals like that, you really want to incorporate them in a really profound way within your video.
Let's talk about visuals for a second then, because a realization I had literally the day after I got back from Toronto was I was thinking of new ideas for new videos, and I was thinking about Tony and Carmen's videos. I don't know if you've watched any of their stuff, but they're really powerful, and they're working with Charles, who is the SFM camera video guy now. And I was watching their videos and thinking, God, like, there's so much footage that I could have got in Brisbane or Toronto or like even London Momentum Day and Dominican Republic, you know, all in the last few months. And now that I've kind of like, I've got a certain level of experience and I'm starting to see why this is so powerful and where this could come in, it's like I'm looking back over those times and thinking, God, I didn't get the footage. So for anyone who's maybe just starting videos, do you have like sort of a process or a model that you keep in mind when you're out and about going places? You know, do you have like certain types of footage that you always try and get, like some kind of, you know, really nice thing of a sunset, or like you in the view with somewhere or walking somewhere to use for these cut scenes? What about those kind of things?
Well, yeah, there's always some key visuals that you always want to try to capture. So one of the most important ones is identifying your location. So in TV terms, that's called an establishing shot. And why that's really important is because if you pop in a close-up shot of you on a beach, we don't necessarily know where that is. So it's really important to try to figure out, you know, what kind of shot could I give the audience right now? And it doesn't necessarily mean you even have to be in it, but just something that establishes your location. And generally speaking, those are big wide shots, right? That has a lot of stuff in it that shows people, oh, okay, there's where we are. Because that's very important especially when you're cutting away. So if you're, again, going back to your beach shot, you know, we've established that location, but now if we cut away, we need to establish, okay, especially if we're trying to build a sequence, the other location that potentially we might be talking about. So that's a really important one. I always, no matter what I'm doing, I always look for those kinds of shots. It's something that establishes the location. Again, depending on your subject, you always want to try to have your subject doing something, and that obviously becomes a challenge if you're in it and you're also trying to shoot it as well. So, and I struggle with that one myself too, because again, you don't want it to look too stagey, but at the same time, the most important thing is you want to try to show action whenever you can, right? Because it's nice to show a location or to show something, but I mean, you need to have people in it ultimately. I guess for me, as a filmmaker, what I really try to do is, again, coming back to trying to tell that story, is you try to build a sequence, right? So what happens there is, and you see that a lot in movies, where you'll see the same action, but you'll see multiple angles or multiple shots of that, right? So let's say, for example, you and I were sitting down having coffee in a nice location, and there's a nice table and it's a coffee shop, right? So in that instance, we'd have an establishing shot, something that says Dan and George are in a coffee shop. So then, as we're talking, then you would move into some of these other kinds of shots that would, as you're talking, for example, you'd have a shot from my perspective looking at you. And then as I start talking, you'd have the reverse of that. So that way you have and I think that's one of the critical ingredients when you're doing these videos, is you want to try to build a bit of a sequence there, right? So in that instance, so you have an establishing shot that says, here's location, there's Dan talking, okay, the reverse as George talks, there may be another shot that shows Dan listening, or another shot shows George listening as Dan's talking, right? So those are some of the critical things. You want to try to change your location. You don't want to just have one static shot that just shows, the same action ongoing. You want to try to change. And what I always do, one of the tricks that I do is, if I'm shooting somebody, I'll get them to do the action, and then I'll just say, stop, don't move. I'll move my camera, and I'll say, okay, do the same thing over again.
Yeah.
And then that way you can capture, continuity isn't 100%, but at least you get the basic same, process, right? And that's one of the tricky things, that as you go down the video road, that you have to do a few times. That is that idea of continuity, where you've got a person doing something, and then you try to move the camera around to get multiple angles. And really, from a shot standpoint, it's pretty straightforward. You've got a wide shot, a medium shot. So if you're getting a shot of me, okay, so a wider establishing shot would be to kind of show a bigger area of my office.
Yeah.
A medium shot would be almost kind of what we're seeing here, a little bit wider, where you can actually see my head all the way down to sort of my waist. The shot right now is probably about a medium close-up. And those three shots are enough that could give you a bit of a sequence if you wanted to build it. So you could, have a wide shot that shows me in my office, then you cut to a medium shot, you could go to a medium close-up shot, and now you've got kind of a nice flow and a sequence that potentially, gives the viewer sort of that, oh, okay, George is talking, I can see. And each shot can really play on the emotion, right? So again, think about, if you've ever watched a documentary where, there's a lot of emotion, what happens in that shot? Generally speaking, they go really close up on the face, because again, you amplify the emotion that's happening in the video. So, again, I'm kind of jumping around, but it really depends on what you're trying to achieve with the video. And, again, I try to shoot as much as I can. So for example, the shoot that I just came off of when I was up at Banff here last weekend. So not only was I there pitching, but I wanted to document my little journey of breaking my particular chokehold, right? So it's always a challenge when you're trying to shoot yourself because you have to be in the frame, right? So one of the tricks that I was doing is my partner Doug is roughly about the same height as I am. So I would use him kind of as a stand-in all the time. When I needed to shoot myself, is I would kind of have him stand there so I could approximate my shot and frame it properly. And then I would, at that point I've got my focus set, or I've got sort of the framing set, and it worked rather well to kind of approximate what I needed to do when I'm trying to shoot myself. The other simple thing, of course, is you hit record, you shoot it, you go back, you play it, you see, oh, okay, framing isn't quite right. That obviously takes some time because you got to really play around with that. So ideally, if you can have another person along, that usually makes the process a lot better, because if nothing else, you've got another pair of hands to help you with.
Yeah, you're right. The thing with the the tripod, for example, you run and you test it. Does it work? Does it not? You go back. It doesn't work. Maybe like light changes, or you want yourself in the right spot with the sunlight. You've just got to adjust it, and it can be a little bit of hassle. Okay, so in terms of, let's get a little bit more technical. Sorry. So let's say we've got the storyboard. We've got a number of different shots that we've shot to establish the location. We've got maybe a couple of different angles to really start to focus on the emotion, and we're delivering a message, and then we want to start editing it, right? So I've just pulled up, well, hopefully this will work. We'll see. We'll find out in a sec. So I've just pulled up Hit Film. Okay. I've just got a new Mac and it's moved everything here. So let me just try and figure out if I can get on a project, just so we can look at a timeline and just get your thoughts, George, on how that would work. Why is it not letting me go to Hit Film? One sec. Oh, it's on full screen in Zoom. Right, okay, so this isn't really gonna give us much of an idea because the media's all offline, but hopefully I think this probably isn't gonna work. Okay, so when I'm building a timeline, so the baseline here.
Okay, so what I would say is, even before you do that, one of the really simple things that you can do, and I see it on the left hand of your screen there, up at the top there, you've got that trimmer tool.
Yeah.
Okay, so the way that would work is, if you had a file there, you double click on that, and then that's going to pop it into that screen.
Yeah.
Now the nice thing, I don't know if you do it this way, Dan, but typically the nice way to do this, and the easier way to do this, is you work in that screen to begin with, and what you're trying to do there is trim down your clips to the basic pieces that you want to use, right? You can do that on your timeline, but I suggest as a beginner that it's easier to do it there, because you can kind of focus on it there versus on the timeline, and then from there you pop it down to your timeline. So maybe we could do a little example of that here.
Cool. So hopefully this is just loading now, if it'll work.
So if you hit play there.
This is where Hit Film's going to decide to crash my Mac. So I've got too many windows open at once. I think it's the problem. God, technology. It'll work fine, and then as soon as you get on a call or something, it's just gonna give up.
Okay, so at any rate, we can kind of even just step through it. So that's play there. Now, if you just move your cursor over, you see the little arrow to the, okay, yeah, there you go.
There we go.
Okay, so now, so that tool you just clicked on?
Yeah.
Okay, now that's an out point, and the one right next to it, if you go back, that's your in point. The other square box with the arrow pointing to the right.
Yeah.
So there's your, okay. So what you do there is, okay, so let's just play your video here if we can a little bit. Okay, so stop it there. Okay. So hit pause. So now let's set an in point there. So just go, yeah, right there. So now you click on that little, right there. Yeah.
There we go.
Okay. So now let's hit play and let's just go for a little while and we'll set an out point there somewhere. Let's wait till it changes. Does it change a shot anywhere soon? So it makes it easy for us to see.
Yeah. Yeah, I'll switch in a minute. In a minute.
So that's fine. We can just set an out point anywhere here.
Okay. There we go.
Okay. So now we've set an in point and an out point. And now we should be able to just drag that. If it's like Premiere Pro, you can literally drag that clip right down into your timeline.
Yeah, so I think with this, I don't know if that's the actual point. You can. That's the point that we set, isn't it?
Yeah.
Just drop it in there.
So that is a simple step of just going one clip at a time, dropping it onto your timeline, and because what you want to do, the first step is it goes right back to that flow. You want to establish sort of the main pieces of your video.
Yeah.
You're not getting fancy at this point. All you're doing, think of it like a puzzle. You're putting all the main pieces on your timeline. And basically getting sort of a rough cut, an assembly cut as we call it, just to kind of get all the pieces in a row, saying, okay, here's roughly where this clip starts, here's where it ends, here's the next one where it starts, here's the next one where it ends, and so on. So that by the end of that process, you've essentially on your timeline got sort of all the pieces roughly where they need to be in the order that they need to be.
Gotcha. And then, so once you've got the pieces in place and you've built the base couple of video layers, for example, what's your process for kind of refining, tweaking, getting like, maybe transitions in place? How do you normally do that?
Okay, so what really comes down to it is it's a process, right? And you've got, just like you've got layers on the timeline there, you've got sort of layers of process. So again, sort of our best practices that we do here. So the first step is you do your assemble edit. So you get everything on your timeline as it needs to be. Then what you want to do is you want to go back in and really tighten up all your edits, right? Because here we're kind of just approximating, depending on how accurate you're being on your trimming there. You want to go back in and now you want to really tighten everything up to where the actual edit needs to be.
Okay.
Then the next part is I actually like to work on audio, because video follows audio in a lot of ways, believe it or not, right? Because a lot of times, especially if you're doing anything musically related, when you're adding sound and stuff, you need your audio to be there to really help you guide the video, right? So in this case where, if we're cutting a video that had a bunch of different components from your Momentum Day conversation, I would want to, work on the audio. And again, you're not getting it 100%, but you're, like in the case of some of the stuff that we do, a lot of times we'll record just on one particular channel, right? So we'll adjust the audio to get it to the level that we need it to be, or if it's only a mono channel or a left channel or whatever, then I fill so that we've got a stereo mix, right? So just doing some basic things like that, just to kind of get the audio level to where it needs to be so that you can properly hear it, because that's really critical in the overall pacing. Because if you've got any sort of issues with your audio, you need to sort of identify that early on. So after you've kind of got that in place, now we move into the support footage. Now this is what we call B-roll in TV language.
Yeah.
And so this is your support visuals that you will now add into and again, if you look at it from a timeline standpoint, this always goes over top of your A-roll or your main video. So if our A-roll is that clip that we just put down on the timeline, the B-roll would be anything above that.
Yeah, gotcha. So all of this kind of stuff up here. Again, I can't really show you, but this is sort of transitions from the images that you saw in the video. Like, so for anyone watching, it's like a clip of me at a beach somewhere, then it's a clip of me on a boat, then it's a clip of me somewhere else just laid over the top.
Yeah. And then, so we're not talking transitions, we're not talking about visual effects or graphics, anything at this point. We're just talking about, okay, again, because we're still at this point, what we're really working on is we're working on the pacing, right?
Yeah.
We're not working on the really fancy stuff yet. All we're doing is we're constantly massaging the pacing so that we've got the video pace right. So as we start popping in these visuals, we really are paying attention to where is the pacing, right? And then at this point as well, we might want to consider, okay, where do we want any additional music to add any emotional level elements? This is where we start kind of looking at that and say, okay, I'm going to have a little bit of music here. Where am I going to add that? Is it through the whole thing? And that's where one of the things that I commonly see is a lot of people like to add in music for the entire thing, especially if it's a short video, like under 5 minutes, right?
Yeah.
And my personal preference is when you use music throughout the thing, it really loses its impact. And I'm a big believer of using music to really create emotional tones in the video. If you want to especially really bring things out, right? There's where music really helps to bring that out, right? Now one of the challenges with that is, you know, a lot of that stuff, unless you're a professional musician, you know, you have to look at third-party resources to find, you know, a 10-second or a 30-second or whatever clip that's going to work for your video. And so this is where, again, as a video professional, I subscribe to a whole number of different services like that allows me to find the clips, because that can be sometimes one of your challenging things is, okay, music would be great here, and you obviously you don't want to pirate anything, you don't want to pull anything off that you don't have copyright. No. So the two again, cost is always a consideration, but video blocks and audio links are two really good resources that we use that are very good in terms of not only just stock footage, but also from an audio standpoint, you know, gives you a lot of material to work with. Again, it's a subscription service, but in my opinion, especially if you're going to do lots of video, audio, I can't say enough about audio. A lot of people overlook audio just because it's video, everyone's thinking visually, but honestly, if you want to really create some emotional elements within your video, audio is very, very important, and it's hard. Again, I'm not a musician. I know how to manipulate audio, but I can't create it, so I have to rely on other third parties to find it. So again, that's all part of the pacing process there. So you got your music, you've got your B-roll. Now you've really started to shape this thing, and you know, don't be afraid to watch it. Like I find a lot of people will watch certain parts, but for me, I like to, you know, and I don't care if it's a, you know, if it's a 20-minute video, I may look at it at chunks, but if it's under 5 minutes, I will sit there as I go through each process, and I will sit there and I will actually watch it all the way through, because you really want to get a sense of the pacing of this thing, right? And the only way you can do that is if you watch it as you start adding all of these different elements. So once you really feel confident that you've kind of got it to a point where it's pretty close, now you can start to look at, you know, the final elements, which can be things like graphical elements. You know, are you going to add in any sort of graphical elements, you know, that identify, you know, people or places? And then the other thing, of course, is transitions, right? So are you know, going to have a fancy transition that brings something in? Is it a straight cut, and so on? And then obviously, if there's even fancier stuff in terms of visual effects or whatever, then, you know, at that point, you kind of look at that. And I should mention too, as you're doing the assembly edit, like especially when we're doing documentary, we'll kind of use a title screen where we'll put in the graphics that says visual effect here,
right?
And just so that you can kind of approximate, okay, we know we're going to have a visual effect here that's going to be about 10 seconds long. Again, we just need to consider that as we're building that main sequence. We're not going to work on it at that point, but we just want to make sure that we've allotted the time that we think we're going to need for that in the actual video itself. So that's another critical piece that you want to do along that sort of initial assembly edit, just to kind of get everything approximated as to where you want to have it.
Perfect, George. So basically, so from the top, you got the focus, of the project, identify the subject. You've got the, let me just quickly stop that screen share so we can see each other. There we are. So you've got the focus, you've got the basic storyboard, the scene, so you can get a feel for the flow of and the pacing, tying any emotional elements as well into it at that stage. You kind of have an idea of where you're going with it. And that means that rather than popping back and forth, you're going to be able to build a nice sequence from the word go. And then when you're actually taking the footage, you need to have the establishing shot or shots that give an idea of where you are. Switching camera angles adds, again, to do with pacing. It sort of helps to build a sequence which people can follow as a story. Then things like emotions, you can have close-up shots on emotions to amplify that. Switching between medium shots, longer shots, which is like a bigger wide-angled shot, and also close shots as well is going to help to, again, establish that sequence, that story, and help people get involved in the story. Think of it kind of like a puzzle, and then when you're editing it, essentially the assemble edit is like the building blocks, the Lego, if you like, that you're putting together to get a feel for the pacing of how it's all going to go. Then go back in and tighten it. So again, I'm guessing this is mostly to do with the timing. Is that right?
Yeah, and again, as you saw in your timeline there, this is where you would do sort of your final little manipulations, where you might lose a second there. I guess it all comes down to how exact you are when you're actually doing your trims. You can be very, very exact there. Me personally, I usually like to try to get it very close. I pop it onto the timeline, and then on the timeline you've got razor tools, or you can kind of expand or close each clip on the timeline, and they all pretty much work the same way, just to kind of get the exact, and that's the great thing about digital, right, is when you zoom in, you can literally go frame by frame by frame by frame to get to exactly where you need to be in your particular edit. So yeah, that's kind of what I was kind of referring to, is to kind of finally get each clip right down to the parts. A great example of that is one of the things that you never want in videos is especially if you're doing an interview, right? So in my world, when we do documentaries or news clips, right, a lot of people, we all start with and ahs, or so is another really big one that people like to end their sentences on. You don't want to hear that. So there's where, again, using your tools on the timeline to cut that out, so that you don't hear the ahs or the so's, right? Gotcha. And the challenge with that, though, is when you make really tight edits like that, if you go to a shot right away and another person starts talking, it can be very abrupt. So there's where, again, the pacing comes into play. You've got to give the audience a little bit of time to adjust when you do a really, really tight edit like that. Yeah. So there's where you might, so if there was a shot of me talking, and then there was a tight edit, and then we needed to go to another shot of you talking, but the two were so tight together, I might cheat there, and I might try to add in a shot that gives me a little bit of a gap that I would cover there, just so that it wasn't such an abrupt edit, because that's the one thing that can be very jarring to the audience, is that if you have a really tight edit like that, and then you go to another shot or another interview clip, especially, that really you can kind of almost feel it. It's like an abruptness that happens, right? So that's where, again, we're probably getting a little bit more complicated in terms of how to deliver that, but essentially that's where the pacing really becomes critical, and there's where you can use things like B-roll to try to kind of space it out a little bit more so it's not so jarring.
So basically, in that example that you've given with an interview, that might be a camera angle of, let's say, me and you talking, maybe from the, what way around am I? About
exactly.
there. Exactly. Trying to get the webcam right. So like that, and then you're talking, but then there's a really tight edit and we need to switch to me. But then in the meantime, we might switch to a shot from behind this isn't going to work, but behind my head where I'm looking at you. We pause for a few seconds, then the audio starts talking from behind my head, and then we switch back to the shot where I'm talking. And it's a bit of a
that's 100%. That's exactly right, because and it may seem kind of odd when you do it the first time, but again, the mind kind of fills in the blanks, right? It's that, okay, we've seen Dan, we've seen George, we know they're there. And even if there is, and again, this is where you got to kind of play with it and where you've got to watch it a few times to see, you know, there's probably a good second there that you want to give as a pause and cut that shot in just so that, you know, and again, you want to kind of leave a shot like that. So that cutaway that you referred to, you know, you might want to have that up for 4 or 5 seconds, and you might want to start it before the edit so that it really kind of masks that, right? Because you don't want to make it look too obvious that, okay, clearly I'm covering it up, and the shot only lasts for 2 seconds or whatever, right? So again, it's like anything else. It takes practice, and you know, the more you do this, the better you get at it.
Awesome. And then, so going back to what we were saying earlier, so assemble, edit, go back in and tighten it, and then the audio. So that's something that I hadn't really thought of before, because what I'd normally do is build the timeline, build the B-roll, and then chuck an audio track on it over at the end to sort of, you know, that kind of feels right. But then, like you say, the ebbs and flows in the actual audio wouldn't necessarily match the timeline, and then I've got to try and jig it here, cut the audio. It's just all messy. Yeah. So audio next. Then the support footage, the B-roll, to get the pacing right, and then finally looking at any additional music. And then last thing is that's when you do like the edits, the transitions to make it look nice and really, you know, build that effect to make it look professional. Okay. Yeah,
that's I think that's a very good overview in terms of sort of the basic steps that you've got to use for sure.
Awesome. And then, so to wrap this up, one thing that I'm thinking is, for anyone watching this who's never shot a video before, this might sound like quite overwhelming and quite a lot of work, because my first ads, and I don't know if yours were the same, you know, having background in this industry, George, I'm not sure, but my first ads were literally stand in front of a camera, talk, film it, chuck some B-roll in, and then, you know, just launch it, which, you know, got me leads. It's got me up to where I am now. So what would you say for anyone who's never done this before and they just want to get started? What would be, do you think, the most effective way for them to easily get some content out that's, you know, that's pretty good?
Hire me. No, I'm just kidding. Yeah, I agree. I mean, like it can sound very, very overwhelming. I think the big thing is just start, you know, fail forward really is what it comes down to. You can start with an iPhone, you know, like one of the critical tools I would absolutely recommend anybody, and you can buy them very, very cheaply, is a tripod. Yeah. Make that investment. That one thing right there can make your videos 100% better, because, you know, if you're trying to do this and hold it and stuff, you know, and again, we all have those selfie sticks, and they do work, but I would recommend 100% a tripod is a critical piece.
Hold on one second, I'm just going to grab my song to see.
Yeah.
I was just going to run over, but then I realised if I took my headphones out, I wouldn't be able to hear you talking, so that wouldn't work. Yeah, 15 quid off Amazon, one of these. And it's got
perfect
a little phone adapter sitting on the top, put my phone in, take the legs out. It goes to about 6 feet tall, so my height. Yeah, really handy.
Yeah, so that to me is one of the smartest investments a person can make, because yeah, it's an invaluable tool in so many ways. But, you know, aside from that, I think it's just experimenting. God knows there's enough stuff on YouTube if you really are interested in trying to develop your skills as a video marketer. You know, it's like anything else. How much time do you want to put into it, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you can do it straightforward, like, you know, like you just showed the audience down there. You know, you can buy a fairly inexpensive tripod. You stick your iPhone in. You know, another good investment at some point probably is having some sort of lapel microphone or secondary microphone that just increases. Like they actually do a fairly good job if you're close, but and I know you have one too. Again, those are under $100 easily too, that just give you a little bit better audio so that it's just cleaner. And, you know, again, these little things you're doing just make the video look a little bit more professional. And, you know, aside from that, whether you want to get fancier in terms of adding in support visuals and all that kind of stuff,
yeah,
that's really just your own sort of choice. Because, I mean, again, look at some of the most successful videos that I've seen in terms of like the Lifestyle Team or Stuart Ross. I mean, really, it's a person talking to the camera, right? There's nothing more basic than that. I do feel though that, we're all hardwired for good stories, and anytime you can throw in a little bit more of a story that has a few more visuals in it, I just think those things tend to resonate a little bit better. So, again, I think though, even just starting and talking to the camera, which is an easy thing in itself to do, mastering that, and then looking at some of the other things that you might want to do in terms of capturing some of the visuals.
No, definitely. And again, just 2 seconds when you're watching, just going to grab a couple of things.
Yeah.
I thought I was, but my video recording stuff is in my golf bag because I played golf with Dad yesterday, and that's in the car. So I was just going to say, for anyone that's literally just getting started, George, spot on. You're absolutely right. The lapel mic, I think, is so crucial because when you try and film, especially outside, putting my own headphones out. God, technology, doing well. When you're filming outside on a tripod and you're standing up, this is quite a long way away from you, and your voice will just sound terrible. So what I do, again, it's really sort of cheap way of doing it. I've got an old phone that I have in my pocket with my lapel mic on that, and then the phone that's on the tripod, I just film the footage on that while recording the audio on my phone, and then when I drop it in the video editor, I just literally line them up, and it's really straightforward. Also, a selfie stick, £4. It's really handy if you're out and about. You can sort of film more of your body in it than trying to hold your phone like that. So just a couple of points.
Yeah, absolutely. It's just that simple. Other little quick tips, like lighting becomes very, very critical. Like natural lighting is by far the best lighting. You can buy lighting kits and stuff if you want to go that way. But my suggestion is to do as much as you can outdoors. Ideally, try to find locations that have indirect sunlight, because when you're directly in sunlight, you get those harsh shadows, right? And sometimes, especially if you're using phones, they don't always do a great job of they don't have that high dynamic range that allows the camera to see all the spectrum from, something that's really dark to something that's really bright. So sometimes that's where you get overexposed or underexposed video. Yeah. So if you can find awnings or places where, like one of the best things I do when I shoot inside is I'll go look. The first thing I do is I look for windows. And I love shooting in front of windows because that's where you've got some great indoor lights. If you do, and that's something we haven't touched on, and maybe we'll spend a couple minutes here to talk about that, is all cameras need a white balance. And now this is a color balance that allows the internal optics of your camera to properly adjust based on the different lighting conditions that you have. Now, one of the common challenges, especially when you're shooting inside, is you can run into different white balances. And this is where sometimes, if you've ever noticed, you get a little bit of blue or a little bit of red looking in your video. Yeah. That's why. So, for example, if you were in a room that had lots of incoming light, lots of windows, and then you also had lights, like traditional lights, like the screw-in incandescent lights, those are very, very different white balances. So my suggestion would be turn off the lights and go with just the incoming lights, especially if you've got a lot of windows with a lot of incoming lights. That allows your camera to only kind of adjust to just that white balance, because when you have multiple white balances, that's where your camera is really going to struggle. So try to always shoot in those situations where you only have sort of one light source, and if you have multiple light sources, try to take one of them away, because that will always give you a better looking image than all of a sudden, you've got a little bit of red in the background, or your face looks red or blue, depending on where your subject is. So another just really simple thing to just keep in mind when you're shooting your videos.
Awesome, George. No, that's so handy. And thank you so much for your time. I know for me, and I'm sure a hell of a lot of people watching this, it's seriously valuable information. And I think you know, I've got a lot of videos that I'm going to be editing over the next few weeks. And this is going to save me absolutely mountains of time. So, Bud, I really appreciate it. Thank you so much for your time.
Yeah, absolutely. My pleasure. Hopefully, yeah, that helps and gives people some ideas on what to do.
Definitely. That sounds good, George. And until next time, I'm sure there'll be another time very soon. Thank you again, and we shall speak soon, Bud. Cheers.